All right. Hey there, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us here. I know it's lunchtime, so I appreciate you all for coming. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Ben Rogojan. Perhaps you know me online as the Seattle data guy. I've been writing for a long time and doing YouTube. For a long time, I used to say accidental writer and YouTuber. I think at this point, it's become intentional. But in my day-to-day job, I spend my time, I've had the privilege to set up data stacks for companies. At this point, it feels like dozens and dozens. And on top of that, get to untangle various messes, come in on more brownfield projects, and try to just get them in a place where companies find that they're returning some sort of value. I think one of the common ways I often see these projects is what I like to call key person dependency issues, which are, someone built a project 6 months ago. They left 6 months ago, and there's no one at the company anymore that actually understands what's going on, so now someone needs to come in and fix it. So that's a lot of the problems I get to see. So today I kind of want to share just how to turn around failing data teams, failing data projects, kind of the things I've learned just from doing a lot of this over the last few years. So to start with, I think it was about 2 years ago, I was having several conversations with some business leaders and data leaders, and a theme kept coming up from some of them. One specific comment that came out was a data leader told me, he's like, I feel like the default state of many data teams is failure. And I think to a degree, he was saying that to kind of maybe be a little bit contrarian at the moment. It was the early 2020s. I remember seeing data teams, and they were all very large, it felt like. Like I would go to some companies, and it felt like 10% of their teams were data teams. I remember having a follow-up conversation after I'd worked at Facebook with one of the data leaders, and he kind of told me, he's like, Ben, think about it. We were like a 40, 50 person team at Facebook, kind of running a support function, and that was all just focused on that support function, right? Like there was no necessary ROI per se. We're spending $10+ million on that team. Was it worth it? Like at the end of the day, it was one of those thoughts I was like, in the moment when I was going through it, I never thought about that. I was like, well, I'm busy. I've got to build my data pipelines. I've got a promotion that I'm thinking about. I never actually thought about is this team successful or not? So I think that's something that now I've started seeing kind of shift in the more mid 2020s, I guess you could say. I do like to say I've got a bit of a bias. I think the reason a lot of people bring me onto projects as a consultant is because maybe the prior team wasn't doing as well, or maybe there was some bit of failure. So I think sometimes I do see more of the bad than the good. I know a lot of teams do really well. But I do think a lot of data teams are not set up always for success, right? Like I think in some cases you have ICs or data engineers who are doing really well, or data analysts or data scientists, and suddenly they're put into a position of, hey, you got to be the leader now, go and figure out what that means. And there's no real necessary coaching on that. It's kind of just, hey, here you go, you get to now spend your time trying to lead a team. And in some cases, I think what that translates to is, you just try to be a better individual contributor, a data engineer. You try to do more work. You're like, okay, how do we build more, deliver more, versus trying to figure out what the business needs. And I also find that, you also have the pressure from the business itself, right? Like you kind of can get easily distracted if you're a data leader. The business will come with certain requirements or certain ideas of what they think needs to be done. They read an article, they saw something, and so now they're distracting you with like, hey, can you bring in all of this that we're reading about, whether it's real-time data, whether it's AI, and you're maybe getting distracted from the things that you're currently even trying to deliver. So how I've seen, I try to consolidate some of these ways that I've seen data teams fail and things that I've had to maybe come in and try to figure out how to solve. That first one, lack of ownership, I think one of the best articles I've read on that is it's by Alex Erwiloff, I hope I'm saying his name right. It's called 6 Types of Broken Ownership, and he really breaks it down into like broken ownership or lack of ownership often comes from some missing component. So in that breakdown, he puts it down into like responsibility, knowledge, and mandate or power. So if you only have one or two of those three, you have some failure of ownership. For example, if you just have mandates, so someone just has the power to make a decision, but they don't have the responsibility or the knowledge, right? Like maybe they pick a tool that you're now stuck with, or they pick a process that now everyone has to deal with, but they don't actually, or they're not really owning it. And so lack of ownership can really take on different forms. Again, maybe it's people don't actually own the processes that they're building, like they build it, and then they kind of hand it off, and now either the data team has to fix it or deal with it, and some issue in there. Another one that I often see is kind of either over-engineering and wrong sizing, which I feel like is a spectrum. Like on one side, I think where most of us like to sit is we want to build things that's, at least if you're technical, that's what you want to do. That's what I want to do. I want to build cool projects. I want to really build big things. And so that's on one side. On the other side, I do think that there are sometimes situations where you pick tools that don't necessarily help you solve technical problems the way you should. You're stuck spending time constantly scaling or trying to deal with scaling issues because you pick tools that don't scale well or don't scale to your problem well, and so you've kind of wrong sized, and that causes issues because you kind of lack the ability to go through cycles very quickly because you're constantly having to deal with firefighting, constantly having to deal with something on the scale side. So you can't cycle as quickly on new ideas and try to figure out, hey, what's actually useful to the business. Next is, I like to say, outputs without any outcomes. So I think this is something I know, especially early on, I suffered from, where I was like, oh, I just got to build more faster. The way I always think about this is when I first started, I got introduced to Tableau. And up until this point, I'd been using D3.js, trying to build dashboards with that, and obviously that takes forever. So when I got Tableau, I was like, this is great. I can now build dashboards really fast. And I think within 2 weeks, I'd built like a dozen dashboards without talking to anyone. And I was like, hey, guys, I built all these dashboards. Isn't this great? Isn't this cool? And nothing actually happened with those dashboards. I'm sure at this point, they don't exist anywhere. But that's kind of what I think about. It's like you never actually thought about what it attaches to. You're just like going through the motions of like, hey, I'm building pipelines. That's what I'm supposed to do every day. That's how I'm supposed to deliver work. And then on the last point, what I hate about this one is like you can do everything right as a data team. You can be successful in the sense of, hey, I'm maybe even delivering dashboards that should connect with the business. But then on the business side, right, there's like this decision avoidance or kind of metrics theater where people look at things and they see them and then the number goes up, the number goes down, but nothing really happens, right? Like it's okay, great. We have a good dashboard. That's all we really needed, and we're not doing anything with it, right? We're just kind of stuck. And so that side is, usually more in the business, I think, and trying to figure out how do we work with the business to actually start making decisions. I like thinking about what are the signs of some of these things, and obviously there's multiple ways you might feel like this is happening. I do a whole talk about like signs of when you should scale, so I like trying to think of how do I kind of see these issues and what's something that I should look for. On lack of ownership, I think it's things like obviously unclear responsibilities. That could be things like, hey, who's actually supposed to be building this automated process? Is it the data team? Is it IT team? Is it just going to be the marketing team? Are they doing parts of this with they hired someone to do this? So that's one part of lack of ownership is maybe no one actually knows. Leadership churn is another thing. So you have a leader that churns every 6 months, every 12 months. No one's going to own that, right? Like they kind of just get sent this project that they now have to take care of, that someone else made all the decisions for, and that really kind of is very difficult to kind of be in. And then just unmaintained assets. So someone built a table, someone built a data pipeline, you go look for who it is, you have no idea who it is, and now no one wants to own it at all because it was built 2 years ago and we're just all kind of stuck with it. On over-engineering, I like to say we all have this. If we like technology, we want to build, we want to use the cool tools. I remember very early on in my career, I was using SQL Server, SSIS, and PowerShell, and I was very sad. That's one reason I left that company, because I was just like, well, I got to be doing what everyone else is doing, even though we were actually delivering a lot of impactful work. We were doing cool things, but I felt like on the technology side, I was like, well, I need to be, at that time, it was Hadoop was still, I think, peak Hadoop. It was 2015, 2016. If you look up Google Trends, that's kind of when it started to dip very, very heavily. So, that was what I thought. I was like, this is what everyone's doing, right? And then I went to Facebook and found out, yes, sort of, but it's all kind of under the hood, and we're all just writing SQL anyways. So there's that side of it as well, and then maybe not fully understanding what the business even needs. I like to say, like, trying to think about things more functionally, and like, they probably don't care whether we built a data lakehouse or a data warehouse or what the semantics are. They're just like, I just need answers. However you get there matters a little less for them, at least. On the metrics theater, I like to say, probably someone's told you we're a very data-driven company, but numbers go up, nothing actually happens, numbers go down, maybe you ignore it, like you're like happy when numbers go up, you're like, yeah, the decisions we made were great. When numbers go down, they're like, well, there's nothing we can do anyways, like there's nothing we can actually change. And then outputs without outcomes, right? Like that's generally like, hey, we're really focused on shipping lines of code. There's a lot of focus on building dashboards, and this is something that I think is not necessarily explicit, but like there's a lot of focus on that, but nothing ever happens, right? Like there's a lot of things, there's a lot of data products, but everyone kind of ignores them. So yes, you're doing a good job and you're technically succeeding on a technical data team side, but I feel like from the business side, you've kind of got this moment of failure. All right. Just another quote that I think I had to work with the CEO to kind of get them to think through this. They eventually said this out loud, and I was like, oh, good, we're on the same page. So basically, they realized, like, oh, we have a 1-to-1 ratio of dashboards to employees, right? It's like, wow, that's amazing. That's a lot of output. But I talked to every business leader, and everyone has told me the same thing, which is we have none of these is actually what we need. We have to go to 8 different places to get the information we need, and then actually put them into a new dashboard that then we send out somewhere else. And so this is something that I've seen a few times, but it was a very funny, I think, conversation, because I think about it, and like you could literally have built everyone the exact dashboard they wanted to at this point over time, essentially, and yet no one has the right information anywhere. All right, so kind of diving into the meat of this talk, which is the tales I've seen or the things that I've seen. And honestly, these are combinations of stories. I've kind of highlighted a few points that I saw that happened over and over again. So there's not necessarily a specific company until the very end. There was one that I think that leader is long gone, and so I think they're going to be fine with this story. But most of these are just a combination. And whenever I post some of these things, I feel like either on LinkedIn in my article or on my newsletter, I feel like I get a lot of people commenting or saying that, where do you have cameras in my data team? How do you know what's going on? So I feel like I can't be too alone with some of these issues. One of them that I like to call out, or that I see a lot, is either some sort of lack of vision or lack of pushback. And when I say lack of vision, like to me, that generally manifests as like there's not a clear thing that the data team should be doing. Like it's like there's not like 2 or 3 things that you could say like, hey, this is what we should be doing, and like everything else, like if we have time, maybe, probably not, but like this is actually what our goal is for the business and for what we kind of what problems we try to solve. And so I've seen this kind of come through like multiple migrations that kind of just cycle through. And this picture, the picture I essentially have on here is actually a conversation I had with someone where they were like, hey, we started with Snowflake, we went to BigQuery, we had some issue there, we went to Snowflake again, and now we're looking at BigQuery again. And I was like, I don't know what's going on, I don't know what you're searching for in these tools. I don't think switching to another tool is the problem here overall. So I've seen that. Actually, I was having a conversation with someone here a few days ago, and they brought up the fact that they're like, hey, we're doing a BI migration, and actually, we already know we're doing another BI migration after that migration. And so I was just kind of sitting there like, so where is the actual point of all that? I like to say you get kind of stuck automating processes for every team, because any team, like I think because data teams have often come out of IT teams, we have enough skills that if marketing asks us to automate something, we can. If finance asks us to automate something, we can. But then we just become, are we the automation team? Are we the data team? Somehow we get stuck on processes that, in one case I remember working for a team where it's like, their process that they were doing was literally financially connected to the business, where it's like you were, figuring out how to split up payments for different, essentially partners, and it's a very interesting process to be stuck with as the data team. Like this is it's crucial, so that part's great, but I don't know if the data team should be doing this. It feels more like it's finance or NetSuite or something very, very different. Kind of in that, I also find that there's a lot of just-in-time development. It's something that Joe Reese, I think, once wrote or at least told me. A lot of data modeling where it's like, hey, let's just build this when we need it. You build your one set of processes for whatever it is, a dashboard, a workflow, and you just keep building the exact set of data or the exact data products just for a single process. And then, again, that leads to like things like data teams being burnt out because they're having to manage all of this stuff. And I like to say a very frustrated consultant, which is me, because I get to go look at this and in some cases be like, well, the future, like in terms of moving forward, there's not necessarily a good choice here, right? Like if you're talking about just-in-time data modeling, you've built all these processes. You can keep trying to support all of those, which isn't great, obviously, because that's a lot of work. You're just going to keep doing that over and over again. Or we can spend a lot of time trying to consolidate it and finding kind of a single point. And someone has to do that, and someone has to do that work. And I feel like a lot of the times it ends up being me. All right, kind of again, I reference outputs without outcomes, but I just think it's funny how often I see this, and so just so many companies I've run into have hundreds of dashboards, maybe thousands in some cases, and again, if you were to sit there and look at and do the math, you're like, I often wonder if we do this, we're like, we spend X million dollars on this data team. I know the finance team probably does that, but I don't know if sometimes the data team takes that into stock and be like, hey, if we spend $5 million, what are we actually delivering on the other side? Are we here to give confidence to the business, which is a valid reason to a degree, but like at a certain point, right? Like what are we actually spending these millions and millions of dollars if on the other side no one's doing anything with it? Everyone's kind of just looking at this dashboard, and I've had this happen over and over again, where again people are like, yeah, we have these hundreds of dashboards, we spend millions of dollars, no one looks at it. And at least with like something like accounting or some of the other departments, like there's a function for that. They do something, right? Like it's like, okay, this is required, this is necessary. But on the other side, right, if the data team does all this and goes through all these motions but doesn't deliver anything, and there's not even necessarily a legal or regulation that requires us to do it, I often ask, well, why are we here? And I think that's something that maybe I'm just getting older and I start thinking about, like, what am I doing? Why am I doing it? How am I actually driving value for other people? And I think that's becoming more and more important in the ways that I spend my time. This one's the more direct example that I have, which was a project where I like to say a data vault that never was. And from a technical standpoint, the team that built this did everything, I think, correctly, right? They split everything up. They had their dev, test, prod. It was great. It was beautiful. They had lots of documentation. I would go through it, and I'd be like, wow, yeah, I can see what you're doing. I see the various pipelines that you've built. You've documented it all. You've built all the tables, etc. I was like, okay, yeah, this makes sense. They had an interesting situation because they were more of a regulated industry, so they had like a custom Airflow setup where like they had to have 4 Airflow instances running on-prem, slightly more complicated for that reason because how they could access their data. So that was like, okay, impressive. You've got that all managed. That's all running. This is cool. This is great. One, they had some data quality issues, so that was one problem. But I think the other problem that stood out to me more was nothing was actually delivered. Like this was a year-long project. 4 people worked on it. They had built this data vault. They had built everything else, but there wasn't anything like a report or anything on top of that. And the reason this really stuck out was because sadly there was 2 analysts who got to spend every day, and I don't mean Monday through Friday, I mean Monday through Sunday, delivering a report for the board, because every day the board wanted a report because it was one of those like daily organizations that were running, and they wanted that report every day. And so they got to spend 2 hours every day building this report because it was never automated, it was never completed, and I really just felt bad. I often wondered why they didn't quit, but we ended up fixing that eventually. But that was kind of an interesting project where it's like you've done everything correctly, right? Like from a data engineering perspective, from a data infrastructure perspective, everything is there. Maybe your data quality needs some solving, but like technically, right, your solution is there. But you didn't actually solve a problem for the business, right? Like you solved the data problem, you did not solve the business problem. And now the business is sitting here and having to actually fix those problems themselves, kind of manually go through versus fully automating that. And that's something that I think it really stuck out with me. I felt very bad again for those analysts, and something I think about every time I'm trying to build, like how do I actually make people's lives easier versus harder. Awesome. So just trying to think about the other side of this, right? Like those are definitely the problems that I've seen. How I definitely try to go through solving this. When I look through and generally the first step I find is figure out what's actually important, diagnose like kind of what needs to keep happening? What is the data team doing that's important? Kind of going back to that example with that financial process, with that team in particular, like that was the one thing that they were doing that was like, hey, this can't stop. If it stops, your business is going to stop and people are going to freak out. So you have to keep doing this. But looking at your dashboards, no one looks at them. No one does anything with them, so we can pretty much cut most of that off and rebuild some of this and just rethink how do we make this simpler. Because this was a funny example where they had gotten a combination of Databricks and Snowflake, and they weren't that big of a company where I saw any benefit from it. It just felt like they were doing it because the data engineering team liked Databricks, the analytics team liked Snowflake, so they're like, well, we'll use both of them because that's what we like to do. And so going through and figuring out, okay, how do we simplify this? How do we actually make this what you need? So we spend time, diagnosing, figure out what's important, what actually drives value, and what's just there because, people were building it and going through the motions. From there, I like to say reset the vision and priorities. So in this case, I think it's really about thinking about, again, what are those like 2 or 3 things that your team is actually trying to do, right? Like being very clear, like, hey, we are a team that if it's reporting, we do reporting. Just make that clear. I know we want to do more than that, but if that's what it is, be very clear and be clear what success looks like in that case. If it's automated workflows, like just being clear that like that's what we do. That's what we focus on, making it clear to the company, like this is what we're going to spend the next little bit on, and that's how we're, maybe for the next 6 months we need to reestablish some of those things, and maybe we're not going to drive things forward. Next, I often say rebuild foundations, and to me this is not just about infrastructure. This is also about things like process, accountability, who owns things, like really looking through the various problems and being like, okay, what do we actually need to rebuild that's around the actual data team? Again, not just infrastructure, that's going to be part of it. You want to spend time simplifying what you can. One example I have here was with one company that I recently worked for. They had built what was probably like 50 to 100 different charts on their embedded analytics, and many of those charts and dashboards were now taking 60 seconds to run or more. And as someone put it quaintly, like anything that takes past 15 seconds can essentially feel broken to most people. So kind of just thinking on that. But when I went and looked through their queries, right, they had built like 50 to 100 odd queries. I was like, oh, a lot of these can be kind of condensed down. We can rebuild this. We can just, instead of like having this hit the database 50 different times, we can hit it twice, really. Like in some of these cases, we can build like 1 or 2 queries to replace some of these 50, because you just build things over time. And I get kind of why that happens, right? Like everyone asks for something, you build this query, you build that query, you build the next query, and eventually you can look at it all and be like, hey, if we actually condense this, we can improve this. So simplifying your architecture, simplifying your tools choices, taking things out where you can, right? Like I think we often try to pick 2 tools where one tool will work well. I think that's always great to kind of be in that next step. And then this last point, create an outcome-obsessed culture. That's, I think, a term that I've really liked, or I've enjoyed recently. I think partially because of the alliteration, because I think a lot of people like the word impact, but I like the term outcome-obsessed. Just trying to figure out how you actually get the data team and the business more focused on, like, okay, what are we actually doing? Like, what is success on the other side? Again, is it building a report, and is that report just there so the board can get their numbers? If that's what it is, great. Then the numbers have to be right, and just have to be delivered correctly. Is it because we want to make a decision on the other side? Okay, great. What is the decision? What are the actions that are going to happen, right? Like sometimes I feel like you give a dashboard to executives, and even when it's exactly what they want, they never really planned anything on the other side. They're like, well, great. I didn't actually have a plan with this anyways, and I think that feels like a lot of it overall. So it's not just about us, the data team. It is also, I think, about the business kind of shifting their mindset and being like, okay, when I get something, I should do something with it. And if I don't have a plan, maybe it's not something we should be focusing on. Oh, that's still that way. This is just one of those quotes that I really like. If anyone's read An Elegant Puzzle by Will Larson, he talks about the fact that you only really get the value from projects you complete. One, I think that's a notion to the fact that we take on too many projects and we don't complete them. But 2, I think there's the aspect of data teams. I feel like the project is over once whatever is delivered is done, right? If it's the dashboard, if it's the table, whatever it might be, if it's the model. But there's the other aspect, I think, of like that's where kind of the project begins for the business often, where it's like, okay, I have this dashboard. Now there's all this other side that I have to do things with it. On a recent project, for example, I delivered a model for a client, and that took like 2 weeks to develop. But the real work started after that. We're like, okay, we have a model we want to test. How are we going to test it? Who are the partners we're going to test it with? When it's actually in development or in deployed, how do we know it's been successful? What are we going to do after if it is successful? What's the next steps after that? Like, can we make it better? And like thinking through that was the problem that took longer. Like working with the partnerships team, working with these other teams, keeping the ball rolling. Those are all things that I do think are important if you want to ensure that your data team does more than just build dashboards. Perfect. Awesome. Well, I think just kind of wrapping it up, and the things that I think about. One, I think tools rarely solve all the problems. They do. I will always say that there's distinct cases that I've had where switching tools have made a difference. They've made my life easier. Which if you can increase the speed of cycles of how fast you can go through a certain project or a certain idea, and be like, hey, we're trying out, looking at this metric and seeing if certain actions change it. The faster you can go through those cycles, the better. So having tools that help are great. They're just not the solution per se. Also, faster outputs, or at least more outputs, never means, or does not necessarily mean you're doing a good job. Again, for me, it's really about that cycle time and testing out new ideas and seeing like, hey, is this better? Is this better if we try? If you've deployed a model, if we change some slight bit of it, does it improve our outcome? If we've deployed a dashboard, are people looking at that dashboard? Are they changing how they act? Is that improving the business, et cetera? And then that last thought that I had, I think, sometime last night when I was writing this was, oftentimes I find, where that data team project ends and where we tend to just throw it over to the business is often where the project actually starts for the business, right? So we can be successful, again, as a data team in terms of like, hey, you've built everything technically correct, but if you haven't completed that other side and figured out, hey, is the business using this? Do we need to help them use it? Do we need to connect? Do we need to keep the ball rolling maybe a little bit? Is there something that we need to do to unblock them on their side? If that's not getting done, there's a good chance that thing will just get ignored, and that's kind of the end of it. All right. Well, thank you. I don't know if there is Q&A, but thank you everyone for doing this. This was great.